In today's video, I'm demoing a Devinci Wilson at the Whistler Bike Park. This is a big bike, and not just because I rode it in size extra large. It's got 29-inch wheels and 200 millimeters of travel front and rear to really soak up those bumps. This is also my first time riding a downhill bike since about 2006, so I'm not the most up to date on what a modern downhill bike should feel like, but I'm really excited to try one out. Let's get right into it with my initial impressions. I usually start my days at Whistler with a warm-up run on Crank It Up, but it turns out that the top of it was closed today, so I started out by heading down Fantastic. It's only a blue trail, but it does have a couple little chunky spots, and right away it gave me the impression that this bike was going to soak all that stuff up real nice. The other thing I noticed immediately about the bike was how noisy it was. It's definitely a rental bike. I don't think that's the fault of the Wilson by itself. I think it's more just that this is a rental bike and, rental bikes get pretty abused at their time at Whistler. I immediately felt comfortable on the bike, and at 6'6", it seemed to fit me very well. I had no qualms about letting off the brakes on these parts that I might usually be feathering the brakes on to keep my speed in check, and blasted right over stuff that I would usually kind of brake check a little bit on. Fantastic does merge back into Crank It Up, so that gave me time to play with the bike at higher speeds and test it out on some jumps. I've heard that 29-inch downhill bikes are hard to maneuver, especially in the air, but I actually didn't find that I had much trouble with that. That could be due to my size, or maybe I'm just not trying to maneuver the bike as much as some other people might be, but I actually found the bike, pretty fun. The other thing I've heard about these long 29-inch downhill bikes is they don't do well on trails that are tame and trails that are super twisty. On that point, I've got to say I agree with them. I know I'm not the most accomplished corner carver. I'm not exactly a berm rooster or a Schralper, but I had a real hard time navigating the bike around these corners here. I did have a grand total of 5 minutes of time on the bike at this point, so maybe with some more practice I'd get a lot better at it, but as it is, I did not enjoy going down this tight course on this bike. I think if I wanted to ride trails like this, I would not get this bike. I would bring something like a trail bike, something that's going to let me really get around those corners a lot quicker and a lot better, even with my limited skills as it is in cornering. So when you're in Whistler, of course you've got to ride A-line. Well, I say that, but actually I don't ride A-line very often. Anyways, A-line's where those 29-inch wheels really bit me in the ass. That sound you just heard was the rear tire clipping my shorts and pulling them down a little bit. I had to stop after this and readjust my shorts a little bit. That was a lesson that I wouldn't forget for the rest of my time on the bike.
You want to blast it?
Yeah, just blasted my shorts off on that landing. But other than that incident, it was smooth sailing on the Wilson. Literally. The long wheelbase of the bike makes for a very stable ride, and I felt super confident letting off the brakes and just blasting down the trail. Jumps and drops on the bike were fun, and I found myself clearing jumps that I had never even tried to clear before, including that big moon booter after that long, steep run-in. I knew I couldn't just ride the bike on flow trails, so I decided to also try a double black trail that I had never actually ridden before that day, called Schleyer, named after mountain biking legend Richie Schley. This trail's got all sorts of features that really make use of the downhill bike, like drops into rock gardens, steep rock rolls, long sections of off-camber routes and bumps, you know, that sort of stuff. Compared to my more modest travel Evo offering, I found the Wilson really thrived in these conditions. Having never really ridden a 27.5 downhill bike, I can't really compare and contrast what one of them might feel like on this trail versus the Wilson, but I can say that I liked how the 29-inch wheels handled it. After Schleyer, I linked it into another double black I'd never ridden before called Detroit Rock City.
Oh, yeah. Still on a downhill bike.
Again, the bike made mincemeat of the trail. It made me real confident even on my first time riding it, and I could tell the entire time that I was holding the bike back, not the other way around. So, what are my final thoughts on the Wilson? Well, I will say that 29-inch wheels on a downhill bike weren't nearly as big of a deal as some people sure make them seem to be. If you believed everything they said, you'd think that a 29-inch downhill bike would feel like a boat on anything but the steepest, most technical, crazy World Cup downhill races blasting down at race speed, but I was doing nowhere near that, and let me tell you, I had a lot of fun on this bike. Would I get the bike if you were planning on learning to do Cork 7s and competing in the next Rampage? Maybe not so much, but as a park bike, I'd say it functions. If you just want to ride technical, steep downhill trails at your local bike park, it's really gonna do well for you. And hey, maybe you might even work up the courage to enter a downhill race. Oh, and another note, while I'm playing this footage of Heart of Darkness, I was reminded about the brake bumps. This is probably the brake bumpiest trail on Whistler, and I was really hoping that a downhill bike would do something more to mute those, but I couldn't really tell much of a difference compared to my offering. They're still harsh, they still hurt your hands, they still suck. Thanks for watching the video of my first impressions of the Devinci Wilson, and really downhill bikes in general, having never ridden one before, or at least not a modern one. If you enjoyed the video, hit like and maybe even subscribe. I'll see you guys in the next one.